Good. No, now we're good. Thank you. Appropriate song today. Okay. Today begins our study of one of the most interesting, one of the more challenging and provocative books in the Bible. It's the little book of Ecclesiastes. Now, if you were taking a basic introduction to the Bible class at college, Ecclesiastes would be grouped together with Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Jonah, a couple of others, under the heading of wisdom literature. It is called wisdom literature because it basically gives a practical guide concerning how to live. There is more. Wisdom literature normally is divided into two areas: traditional wisdom and guess what? Non-traditional wisdom. Now, traditional wisdom basically says this: if you love God and obey His commands, you will be healthy, wealthy, wise, and have plenty of male children. That's what they look for, the Old Testament, sorry. Psalms, Proverbs, and really the majority of the Old Testament express that view in one way or another. Non-traditional wisdom, on the other hand, questions that view. It says, and I paraphrase, you can love God, obey His commands, and still get cancer and die before the age of 30. That, to be sure, is a minority report. You see it expressed in Job, Jonah, and most prominently in Ecclesiastes. Harold Kushner. You heard of Harold Kushner? Okay, the famous rabbi who wrote, "When bad things happen to good people," yes, calls Ecclesiastes the most dangerous book in the Bible. Now, why would he say that? Well, Ecclesiastes literally asks all the questions. It questions all the traditional answers and leaves us in a most interesting place. We will identify that place where it leaves us before we complete the book. So you got to hang with me. Tradition has it that King Solomon authored this little book. The writer refers to himself as son of David and king in Jerusalem. That would suggest Solomon. The wealth that he makes reference to certainly speaks of kingly living. The only problem is that the writer identifies himself as Koheleth, an interesting word in and of itself. Koheleth can mean teacher, preacher, assembler, gatherer, debater, and so forth. There's no doubt that Koheleth wishes to attach himself to King Solomon, more than likely because of Solomon's great wisdom, if in fact there is another author to the book. Now, I'm not saying there is. I have no problems with Solomonic authorship, but I will use the term that the writer of the text uses, and that is Koheleth. If you want to think of Koheleth as Solomon or some 5th or 3rd century BC poet or sage, I have no problem with that either. But we'll talk about Koheleth. Whoever Koheleth is, his message is clear. Quote, "Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." That is the theme of his message. That phrase, or some form of it, occurs 35 times in the course of 12 chapters. It really stands out. It really is odd. The Hebrew word translating vanity is chebel, H-E-B-E-L, a hard H, so chebel. It can refer to breath, It can refer to a breeze or vapor, something not substantial. It lacks solidity. It lacks permanence. Koheleth says that everything is hebel. Everything is meaningless. Everything is temporal. Here today, gone tomorrow, and seldom remembered. What's the point of life anyway? Koheleth might be saying that there's no point to life. That kind of thinking is perhaps the exact opposite of what you and I have been taught all of our lives. We were taught that there is meaning and purpose in life. We believe it, we even teach it to others. Why does Koheleth say the opposite? Now, that's a great question that I think will be answered in the rest of the book. In verses 3 through 11, Koheleth lists a series of meaningless acts or experiences. Quote, "What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun?" Well, I took Koheleth at his word here. Could we make a list? I mean, let's see. From a lifetime of work, and most of you, that's where you are. You finished a life, or you're in the process of finishing a lifetime of work. What should we have? Well, I made a list. We should have, I think, a profession, some material goods, family, knowledge, and character. Those are things that come to my mind quickly. What does Koheleth say about such things? All of that is transitory. Why? Because they don't last forever. You can't take them with you. Even a good name will be forgotten. For Koheleth, all of this is hebel. Koheleth says that there is a certain monotony in life and even in the world. Verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1, quote, "A generation goes and a generation comes. The sun rises and the sun goes down. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full." This too is hebel. Humans face the challenge of trying to be satisfied. Quote, "The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing." We can't see enough, and we can't hear enough, according to Koheleth. Maybe Mick Jagger and Keith Richards was right when they wrote the song, "I can't get no ba-da-da satisfaction." Okay, maybe. What about history? Quote, "Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new'?" History appears to change, but does it really? Is history going somewhere? Koheleth thinks not. Quote, "It," namely everything in history, "has already been in the ages before us. All is hebel." Koheleth picks up another train of thought. Quote, "I, the teacher, when king over Israel and Jerusalem, applied my mind to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven." So, Koheleth gives himself an assignment, a mission. He is going to attempt to make sense of it all. He's going to try to find meaning and purpose in life. Now, I applaud that. He is a philosopher, and that is one of the main questions of philosophy. What is the meaning of life? Koheleth believes that God has given this task to all humans. How so? Well, think about it this way. Our very lives pose a series of questions that only we can answer. What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to live? What will my priorities be? How will I relate to God, others, the environment? These are existential questions. Life is about answering them. But note this, Kohelet says, quote, "It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with." Why is answering these existential questions an unhappy business for Kohelet? There could be a couple of answers. First, he says that, quote, "What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted." Now, what does that mean? One commentator says, quote, "Some problems cannot be solved and some information we can never find." Most of us have experienced that statement. We will probably never know the answers to some problems. Why did he or she get cancer, dementia, or even die from a freak accident in their teens? We've stumbled upon those problems with no answers, haven't we? Kohelet says, secondly, quote, that trying to answer those unanswerable questions only leads to frustration. Quote, "For in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow." Can anyone or can one know too much? Can one ask too many questions? Can too much knowledge become a paralysis and prevent us from acting? Can asking unanswerable questions simply frustrate us? Well, I think Kohelet is on that path. Is he a skeptic? Is he a realist? We will find out. Now, those are the major points of chapter 1. The question is, where does this leave us? What have we gotten ourselves into by reading this little book? First, some things to think about. Kohelet is prepared to ask the really big questions in life. Is there meaning and purpose in life? Is there a God who controls the future? Will obeying God's rules ensure health, happiness, and a degree of success? Most of the time, we become so busy with living that we simply do not dwell on these major existential questions. Kohelet will make us ask them. Second, as I said, our lives are questions. I think this is true. Because being a human and being on earth presupposes some important questions. Who am I? What kind of human being am I? What am I going to do to survive? How am I going to live? These questions must be answered. We can't put those off. We can't delay answering those questions forever. We have to grow up. Now, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir. Most of you, let's see, I'm looking at you. Yes, most, with the exception of just a couple. Most have answered those questions already. And we are in the final chapters of living them out. But you can tell your grandchildren, about this, okay? Third, speaking of questions, somewhere I read or thought of the following idea. A good question is better than a good answer. Why? Because an answer normally causes us to stop the search and put our inquisitive natures on hold. We can even become, defensive, or worse yet, dogmatic about our answers. It's my way or the highway kind of thing. Whereas a question keeps us thinking and searching, and that kind of temperament may open up new possibilities for us. Besides that, seeking and searching keeps us humble. I stumbled across a post by Sean McDowell, which quotes a book by Kevin Kelly that lists several marks of a good question. Among those are the following. First, a good question cannot be answered immediately. Now, why is that good? You think you'd want to answer the thing. Well, it makes sure that our thinking is critical and comprehensive. Can't be lazy. You got to think about something and think hard. Second, a good question challenges existing answers. Well, that is true, and that can cause problems. People don't normally look kindly on answers that go against tradition. We've got a whole host of people of whom that is true. I mean, in history that we can talk about, beginning with Socrates, one of my favorites. Third, a good question creates new territory for thinking. Yes, a good question broadens our perspective and our understanding. And finally, a good question is one that generates many other good questions. Now, why is that good? Because it can generate more answers also. Anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it today anyway. Finally, we don't and we can't just live with questions. There must be some answers. In fact, we are forced to find answers. The question becomes this, and I want you to do this with me. What are Koheleth's answers to the questions he raises? To be sure, Koheleth is going to put forth an answer or answers. It will be up to us, you and me, to find out Koheleth's answers. And then we have to analyze them to see if we agree or not. That is part and parcel of this study we have got ourselves into. By the way, you know what it's called? Life. That's what it is. And how we answer those great existential questions become our lives. So, I'm looking forward to where all of this takes us. And if you're not getting the midweek missive, that's when I tell you what I want you to read, and I try to put some hints out there about where we're going. Make sure you get up with Miriam, because we want to be on board with this tough book, okay? Our Father and our God, we are grateful that there are some books in the Bible that really challenge us to think in ways that perhaps we've never thought before. At least we thought were heretical. Well, this is one of those books. And the good news is that Koheleth raises controversial questions, and he actually answers them to one degree or another. And the fact is, that book made it into the canon, which means that it's in our scope and reach of understanding, and it is also within the bounds of orthodoxy, even though it challenges orthodoxy. And maybe that is one of the answers in the book. It's okay to challenge what has been thought. Anyway, we ask God's blessings upon us as we continue this venture. And this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.